We were formed in March 2020, and now we have over 150 members. The club is open for every GBC student and alumni, no matter what your program is. Our purpose and our mission is to deliver real-world experience and give our members the opportunity to develop and advance their skill sets in business and analytics as well, and to create every networking opportunities. We host many different events throughout the year. So for example, today we are hosting a seminar series, which we try to host every month. But we also have skill learning activities, networking events, and also we take part in some competitions. So the best way to keep updated in our events is to join us in our LinkedIn group. I'm going to post the link here on the chat box. So we have two different groups. We have the Analytics Club group itself, which is like I mentioned, every GBC student and alumni from every program is more than welcome to join, which is this link here. And also we do have the Analytics Hub, and that's like everyone can join that group. And I'm going to post the link on the chat box as well. So you are all more than welcome to join us in the groups. It's a great way to network with different people. We discuss trends in the analytics industry as well, and there's some job postings every now and then. So it's a great opportunity to keep up with what's going on in the industry. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our guest this evening, Professor Mark Radha. He's a George Brown alumni and also a professor for GBC's School of Management. Mark is also currently the Chief Brand Economist for Strata Insights, a company that is specialized in brand performance and that uses data and analytics to measure and quantify the financial importance of the brand and other intangibles. As a brand economist, Mark believes that the brand is a very important financial contributor for any business. In his career, he had the opportunity to work with very renowned companies such as RBC, Manulife, General Electric, CBC, KPMG, and the list just goes on and on. So it's a great honor and great pleasure for us to have you tonight as a guest, Mark. And I'm sure that everyone will find your presentation very insightful and interesting. And you're more than welcome to start.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. Let me just share my screen. Let me know if it comes through properly. Can you see it?
Yep, I can see it.
Fantastic. So today's topic is just this very high-level introduction into brand economics. And brand economics can be a very dense topic. You know, there's a lot of moving parts to it, but I'm going to really focus in on just a couple of areas, specifically around messaging. Today's agenda is very simple, kind of hit up an overview about how it all began with brand economics. We need to level set on a few things and then finally dive in. I think a case study is incredibly important. We need to get our hands dirty just to see how some of this is done. And hopefully you'll be able to apply this for yourself. So it actually all began because I told my parents that I was not going to be an engineer. And for all those South Asians out there, you know exactly what the conversation goes like, right? No, you have to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And, you know, I told them business was where it's at. I really wanted to double down on this. And that's exactly what happened. You know, I kind of stumbled into something I didn't really even understand the value of. I attended George Brown. I did the B145 program, business administration. And then I decided to just kind of continue on the business route through Ryerson and finally a master's at Newcastle. And I truly appreciate my time at George Brown. I had amazing professors. And what's amazing is that those who were my professors back in the day are now my colleagues today. So it's been this full circle that I've come across, and I'm just super excited to be there. But throughout my entire career, be it academic or professional, there's been two questions that have haunted me, and I've always tried to find the answer to. And the first is, what does value actually look like, right? And then how can we measure it? And, working in the finance field in private equity, we used to always think that value can be found in the financial performance of a company. You just look at the balance sheet, just look at the income statement, everything that you need to see is going to be there. And we used to fund companies like that, high growth, several 100% a year. But it was never, we were never able to fully answer that question. Where does value come from? Can I look at the balance sheet? Can I look at the income statement? Take, for example, any high growth company that we have today. A lot of that is based on, say, a patent, right? And you might spend $10,000, $20,000 registering a patent. And if you look at some of these tech firms, they're receiving billions of dollars of revenue just from that $10,000 registration. So the value of the patent itself is not fully represented anywhere in the financial statements. I spent some time at Lululemon. I loved my time there. I was in charge of culture in Toronto. We were just opening up so much stores. And so, in search of these questions about value, Lululemon taught me an important lesson, right? Lululemon was this company that was, founded on two pillars, which was culture and community. And they spent nothing on marketing, right? And for traditionally, if you think about marketing and brand management, things like that, you always think, well, I have to advertise somewhere. I need to have social presence or something like that. But Lululemon was this amazing company which didn't do any of that stuff, but they were such an amazing success. And what was interesting is that if you looked at Lululemon's financial statements, the true value of Lululemon wasn't on its financial statement, right? What is the value of Lululemon? It's its brand, right? It's how people engage with the company. It's its reputation. You couldn't find it anywhere. And that's the same thing for, iconic brands like Coca-Cola. What's the value of Coca-Cola? Is it found anywhere on its statements? It's not. You can't see it. What's the value of vitamin water? Well, that's around $1 billion. We know that because they made an acquisition and it's brought in. So it's amazing because there's so many ways of kind of approaching measurement, and each company has kind of taught me something different when it comes to understanding where value comes from and being able to measure it going forward. I then went on a series of experiences. One of those was in the brand measurement and tracking side. And I quickly realized that brand measurement tracking was all rear view mirror stuff. What happened in the past? It never really taught me or told me about what could happen in the future. So then I directed my attention to brand valuation. I co-managed the offices of brand finance here in North America. And it was amazing because brand valuation can really tell you the size of something. But again, it struggled with what can I do about it? How can I actually go about measuring this stuff and growing it for the future? So that led me to found my own company. We'll co-found it, right, with a few good friends, and we called it Strata Insights, and we were trying to figure out, like, who are we? And we quickly realized that we're actually brand economists, right? We're here to use data, we're here to use science, and we're here to measure and manage how a brand can grow sustainably in the market, as well as be able to communicate its value to every single person within the organization. And we're fortunate because we've been, quite busy with some amazing clients, as well as setting standards globally. But if I were to try and encapsulate brand economics in a few words, it's so difficult, right? It's not really a thing. It's almost like a way of life. If we were to look out, in the night sky, and I was to say, look up and tell me what you see. You'd look up and if you can see past the haze of Toronto, you'd probably say, well, I can see some stars, I can see the moon, but I don't really see a lot of things. If I were to then hand you a telescope that I bought from Amazon or Walmart and I say, now tell me what you see, you could probably say, you know what, I see more stuff. I don't really know what it is. It could be stars, it could be satellites, But I see more definition with the moon. I see some other planets that are out there, and they're shining in certain ways. And then finally, if I were to give you access to something even more powerful, like an observatory or Hubble, you'd be able to see things that are so much further into space, things that have always been there, but we've never had the optics or the ability or the technology to be able to see it. Same sky, but different technology, different viewpoint altogether. And it's amazing because you're now able to kind of plot your position in this universe and figure out where are we, right? And we can relate that to businesses and the orbits that they have within sectors, right? Who's orbiting who? What is the value that they're creating? Is there something that's going to come from out of the frame and disrupt us completely? And what's amazing is that all of these things are creating data points, and we literally have constellations of data. And they're just tiny points that are out there, but we've never actually figured out how to connect all of these viewpoints together to create a picture or a map, and then to finally be able to action it. So my best attempt at kind of summarizing what brand economics is if you take a section of behavioral science or finance, mathematics, stats, and you blend it all together, and that is what brand economics is. So that brings us to level setting before we move forward and kind of get dirty with this case study. And the first thing that's happened that we really need to be aware of and understand is that the world has completely changed. I think we kind of understand it in the sense of COVID and how much things have changed for us, but there's been this gradual change since the 70s. So this is a composition of the S&P 500 from the 70s. So the majority of it was tangible. So things that you could hug, you can throw, you could kick. If you drop it, it made a sound. And this is how a lot of people generated value. This is their properties. This was their equipment, right? There was not a lot of intangibles. But today that number has completely flipped, right? The majority of value generated in today's economy is generated from things which you can't even touch and hold. Things that if you drop, they don't make a sound, right? We no longer rely on the physical world to generate that value. We actually see that in action. CVS acquired Aetna. And this is like saying Shoppers Drug Mart acquired Manulife type of thing in the US. And the value of that acquisition was obviously a staggering $70 billion. But look at the value of the stuff you can touch relative to the stuff you can't touch. We see that with, some classic brands that we have, literally cult brands, Tesla and Amazon and Google, Airbnb. Airbnb doesn't own a single property, yet it's the largest hotel brand that's out there, right? Larger than Marriott and Hilton, absolutely everything. Tesla is interesting. So Tesla puts out the fewest number of cars, yet they're the largest automotive company out there, right? The world is not, business today does not require a physical asset in order to generate value. Where's Tesla's value coming from? It's coming from its perceptual future that it's creating, right? It's completely reinventing what it means to be a business and where does value actually come from. Essentially, it's rewritten what raw materials are and really has stated that intangible assets are the new raw materials. And what's challenging about this is that we don't actually have ways of measuring this. We don't know what the data looks like for us to measure this, to be able to communicate the value, to invest into it, and to grow. The next thing that we need to level set on is the concept that brand is actually an ecosystem. The things that are the most valuable to us is completely invisible. If we think about the earth, right? and we think about what actually fosters life on Earth and what enables us to live and breathe and be successful and build these buildings and build airplanes and travel and enjoy life, are, you know, a set of systems and ecosystems that we can't usually see, or we see, you know, a little bit of evidence of it. You know, one such thing is like the ozone layer, right? We know that the protections that the ozone has for us and how that fosters life here. We have things like the magnetic sphere on Earth that, you know, deflects a lot of the solar radiation. Incredibly important to us, but we don't interact with it on a daily basis. At least we're not present to it in a daily basis. And brands are actually no different. There are things with brands and businesses which are internal and visible. So these are things that you control internally, and they're typically visible to external parties, right? This is like the marketing, the packaging, customer service, all those things. But there are actually layers that are actually more important to the company and to the business than what the look and feel is, right? We call this the little b brand. The next layer are things which are still controlled internally, right? But they're not as visible, right? So this is the IP, the culture, right? We get a sense of the culture and the diversity, the logistics, operations, things like that. And that creates incredible amounts of value, but as a consumer or someone external to the brand, I'm not always aware of it, right? What's actually going on. Amazon Marketplace is this great example here, where if you grab your phone, you order something, you hit buy, 2 days later or the next day, you want your doorbell to ring and the package is there, right? That's a function of its logistics and its intellectual property. That's the value that Amazon brings you, right? Amazon can change its name to something else or change its color scheme from that like grayish brown to and the yellow to something else. And largely your experience may not change, right? Because value for you is not derived from the look and feel. Value is derived from the things that you can't necessarily see, but you derive benefit from. And this is where we all get hung up in the management space. We always look at the look and the feel, and we forget to measure the things that are kind of below the surface and that actually create value. And then that final layer is things that are completely external to us, right? That this is where we participate. This is all about the competition, the regulation in the industry. Maybe it's the economic conditions itself, like COVID, right? We can't control that, but we have to live this reality and participate in it. And that greatly affects the brand itself. Another example of this is, you know, self-driving vehicles. You know, I think it was Uber's self-driving car struck somebody and killed them. And then the government came down and said, we got to shut down or at least temporarily cease all of the self-driving programs that are out there until we understand them a little bit better. And so this is something that we participate in and we're subject to, but we don't necessarily control. And so when you kind of aggregate all of these together, you start to see that there's this big B brand that emerges, right? There's an ecosystem that's here that we all participate in, and that you can actually start sourcing data and deriving data from it and manipulating it so that it can generate a financial outcome for you. The last thing that we need to kind of level set on before we just run straight into the case study is this notion that brand is a team sport. We get so hung up on market mix modeling, and this is where data and analytics really shine, right? We're understanding what we've invested into the brand itself. Is it in social media, search, you know, traditional advertising, a billboard, whatever that may be. And we're trying to maximize the impact that it has, the ROI that it has. But we forget something. We forget that it's actually a brand mix model that we should be looking at. It's not just the marketing side itself. And this is an actual client example in the tech space where we discovered that all of their marketing effort could only contribute to 10% of the value or the reason why they're successful in the market. People were engaging with the brand for reasons outside of marketing. It wasn't about the website or social and things like that. With this client, it really was about customer service and care, about the product, the operations. Is it rolled out? Are you rolling out updates properly, right, from the R&D perspective? And so we really need to shift from being a siloed-based approach into a enterprise approach, because brand really is an enterprise activity. And what's interesting is that we can see this working really well, or we can see the failures. When it comes to reputation, a great example of that is United Airlines, right? Fly the friendly skies. This is an amazing campaign that was done by them for decades. And they were doing extremely well. And all it took was the decision from the legal team, from the ops team and finance to say, hey, there's this really cool thing called overbooking, and here's the data to back it, and this is how we can minimize, minimize people being bumped off, but we can maximize revenues. Some people just don't show up for their flight, so let's go overbook. And we know exactly what happened. We know that someone kind of got beat up, they got dragged off the plane. United Airlines lost $950 million of market capitalization within 24 hours. Right, that's a huge loss based on a siloed approach and not including absolutely everyone within the organization when it came to making this type of decision. Now, United was able to build back up that market cap, but what ends up happening is that there's a longer tail effect here, which kind of creeps up over time. And that is, when you start to think about how is it that you book a flight? I know that when I book a flight, I'm thinking of max 3 airlines. That's it, usually 2. And so when you go and violate, your reputation and the trust that you have in the market, what ends up happening is that you might fall from 3rd in the consideration set to 4th to 5th. And that eventually has an impact on revenue. We can see that culture and diversity is also equally important, and it's an amazing asset that we don't have the data or even the analytics chops to be able to properly calculate until now. The chief diversity officer from IBM left and went to Microsoft for almost the same role. And there was a lawsuit that IBM launched. And just look at the language, and we've never seen this before, right? But what's amazing is that IBM is talking about their diversity strategy and their culture in terms of competitive advantage, impacting innovation. If it gets out there, it can cause competitive harm. They've had to been able to measure this somehow, right? This intangible asset called culture and diversity, and been able to link it to financial outcomes in some way, right? There has to be KPIs and data to back this. Microsoft kind of agreed with them. They said, yeah, of course, it impacts innovation, satisfaction, productivity, profitability. These are words that we've never heard before, even if you rewind 5 years, right? How a company talks about themselves. We live in a time where the things that we thought were unmeasurable, they're measurable today. And it's amazing. And it's really through the advent of data and analysis and computing power and just technology overall that we've been able to shift how people think about brands and management, and how and where value is created, and how we can start to record value. One of those ways is this concept called brand economics. And it's actually very simple. You probably live it on a day-to-day basis. There are things that we interact with when we go to purchase something, or even if we're kind of considering a product or a service that's out there, right? This could be the marketing materials. This could be, if we're talking about a bank, it could be the branch, the ATM. It could be even the platform itself, right? Logging into the banking portal and the interactions that we have, the salespeople, whatever that may be. But there's a slew of interactions that exist for every brand. Those interactions feed perceptions. How do we think and feel about the brand? Do we love it? Do we hate it? Do we trust it? An interesting example from the past couple of weeks, if you've been paying attention to the stock market, is, this whole thing about GameStop, the stock that rose so fast and it went through the roof. And what ended up happening was Robinhood, for legitimate reasons, had to curtail the purchase of the stock for financial reasons, except that how they interacted with their customer base was done so poorly that the perceptions of the brand just deteriorated so fast. People didn't feel like they could trust it anymore, right? Especially with a name like Robinhood, you're taking from the rich and you're giving it to the poor. Other brands that had better interactions and communications with their stakeholder base, like Webull or TD Ameritrade, they had the same issue, but they communicated and interacted completely different. And those perceptions held. People might not have liked it, but people would have still trusted the brand, accepted it, right? You're talking about people's money, their long-term goals, right? But dollars are very personal, right? So perceptions are extremely important. This is the one thing that it doesn't matter how much money you have, you cannot buy, right? You can buy your way into all sorts of interactions, but building that equity with somebody, that brand equity, that trust, that familiarity, that is something that takes just time. And then finally, their behaviors, right? So, we interact with the brand or an asset in some way. It changes how we feel about it. Maybe we're aware of it, not aware, and then we behave. And this could be, we either purchase it could be we recommend it in some way, or maybe we just stay away and we say, guys, don't buy that, and here's why. Right? So there's both positive and negative behaviors that can be measured. And ultimately, they're financial outcomes, right? They're always financial outcomes. And so we're able to actually kind of tie this entire continuum together and break it out a little bit further. If we're talking about interactions to perceptions, we're talking about things that are tactical. Perceptions to behaviors, things that are very strategic, right? And finally, behaviors to financial, things that are all about financial efficacy. So the first thing that we can do is we can actually go out and start to break down what those interactions are. We can call out a specific asset like a website. We can go down a channel, be it Yelp or something like that for reviews. We can talk about the product itself, the customer service. When it comes to perceptions, this is where it gets a little kind of touchy-feely. Do we feel valued? Does it save me time? Is it prestigious? And the number of perceptions that exist, there's just hundreds of them based on what you're trying to create for that brand itself. Behaviors are a little bit easier to kind of put your arms around. Did you visit the website? Did you seek a initial consultation? If we were talking about, say, purchasing a vehicle, one of the things that we would have in the behaviors is, obviously, did you go and kind of spec it out on the website, as everyone usually does? But did you book a test drive, right? So some behaviors are more valuable than other behaviors, and we have to be able to source the data from those behaviors and load it up into the model itself to understand which ones are leading KPIs and which ones are lagging. And then finally, the financial outcomes itself. So this is what kind of like the brand economics pillars look like. And you can start to customize each one of these things based on your company and where you are in the industry itself. So that if you want to, say, get people to click on an offer or apply to your job posting, that you could trace it back to certain perceptions have to trigger and be fired. And those perceptions are going to be led by certain interactions or things that you invest into in the market itself. So the beauty of this is you can go kind of back and forth through the entire pillar system to figure out what is it that you want to kind of moneyball, essentially, right? What is it that you want to gain? So now that we've level set on a few of these things, what I want to do is I want to take you through an actual case study of someone from the tech sector, one of our clients. And this is an interesting case study because it was all about growth, all about positioning, and it's going to be focused on that second pillar, the perceptions pillar. Because a lot of the data that we can source from the company, it's quite easy to get the interaction data, right? You know, where are you investing? What are the budgets that you have? But it's that second pillar which is kind of elusive all the time. What is it that you measure? So this client had this $2 billion growth goal by 2021. They had recently been taken private by Microsoft and Salesforce in this joint venture. The competitors were unbelievably large and had a lot of money to spend. What they realized was that it didn't matter how many salespeople you hire, you could no longer actually grow your business using salespeople. All right. And we've seen a lot of companies kind of take the opposite approach. Well, you know, if I need to grow by X amount, let me just hire more salespeople. And, you know, our top line is going to grow by that. And all of a sudden, what they find is they can't grow. The experience declines dramatically, and they're just eating it on the margin side. And all of a sudden, they're not as profitable. I love to bring up Oracle with this because Oracle, you know, really thought that they could just start hiring tons of people and that's going to translate to revenue, and it never did, right? And it took them, I think, almost 3 or 4 years to realize that and then start cutting back and really refocusing the brand in quite a few other ways. And so this CMO came on and they wanted to understand, you know, number one, can we actually meet our growth targets? And how should we position or maybe even reposition our brand, right? What is the data that is needed for us to go about and make sure that when we execute, it's going to be done with a high level of certainty? So what we did was we went out and we obviously commissioned market research. We looked at stakeholder data and we looked at existing data within the company itself. And what's amazing is that companies have so much data within them, but they just don't know what to do with it. You know, we always kind of joke and say that they're data rich, insight poor. Where companies see one point of data, most like analytics geeks like us see like 7 or 8 points of data. So we're able to take it and extrapolate and do amazing things. So obviously from the interactions perspective, there was, you know, primary research, there's budgets, SEO data usage, countless different things. But from the perceptions perspective, there was only some primary research that we were able to field. There was some desk research and a few industry reports. So not a lot of data to actually feed the second pillar itself. And that's where we're going to focus a lot of this case study to understand, you know, what this company did and how can they move forward. So a bit of a warning as we go through these next few slides. These slides are going to have a lot of numbers to it, right? If we're talking data, we're talking numbers. And it's going to be a little bit messy because there's nothing clean about data. So the first thing we did was we went and we looked at how are they actually positioned in the marketplace today. And these are just a few of their massive list of perceptions that could exist within this space. And we looked and we said, hey, you actually position yourself today on the basis of value, right? Great value for money. You're easy to integrate. You're ranked highly by industry analysts. And you've got this wide range of services. And by the way, they really loved the ranked highly by industry analysts. They had that plastered everywhere on their website. If you picked up the phone and called them on that hold, that, you know, that annoying little hold message that you get, oh, Gartner loves this, Forrester loves this, all this stuff, Magic Quadrant this and Magic Quadrant that. But it was an important part of how they grew, and it worked. Right? So I don't want to poo-poo it, you know, just overall. It worked for a time. It helped them grow, but, you know, there had to be a change. So what did we do? We fielded research. And this is where we start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion to figure out how the strategy changes the more data and the more analysis that you layer on. So the first thing that most people do is they look at, well, how are we doing? How's the client doing relative to the competition? And what you start to see is that on the bottom for the things in green, well, our client was amazing. They're beating the competition, right? They're investing so heavily into this and their investments are paying off. And when it comes to entrepreneurial, hey, that's the one thing that the competition is really beating them on. So it brings up this question. If you were the CMO, what do you do? Do you double down on the bottom four and say, we're doing so well with this, so we're going to continue to do well and invest all of our time or energy or resources into that? Or should you start to look at entrepreneurial to say, maybe this is an attribute that we need to shore up in the marketplace and at least equal or maybe even best our competition? But the problem is it's not clear, right? It's one or the other. It's really a coin flip. It's 50-50. It's completely subjective. So what we started to do was figure out, was it even important, right? And what we start to find is that entrepreneurial is like mid-pack, right? It's a 57. It's not unimportant, but it's not extremely important either. Ranked highly by industry analysts towards the bottom, the thing that they loved was also kind of mid-pack. It was almost the same as entrepreneurial. Value, good service, trustworthy. We start to see a few things start to pop up that are brand new, things that they hadn't even considered, especially like positioning as trustworthy. It was extremely important in the industry. A lot of people are saying that. Good service and delivering good service, extremely important. But there's something about human psychology that we need to take into account when we figure out what is it that we want to do. Because what we say is important to us is never how we behave, right? Studies have shown that we keep on saying that the environment is extremely important. How many of you have actually gone out and spent the extra money, that price premium, to buy a green product? I guarantee you the majority of us have not done that. Or if we've done that, it's been in very selective cases because it's on sale or something like that. But for the most part, not a lot of people actually follow through on what they say is important. So we have to layer in the next calling, which was behaviors. And we start to see that if we look at what actually drove behavior, so forget about what people said, how did you act? The most important thing that drove behavior was at the bottom, easy to integrate. But if you look at the bottom four, only 25% of their strategy, so one out of the four things they spent their time and their dollars and their resources on was even driving behavior, why people actually bought from you. You know, there are a few things that popped up, being forward thinking, transforming your business, and good service. That thing about entrepreneurial, we can see that it's towards the bottom. It's the 11th most important thing. So if we kind of rewind this back to where we were a few slides ago, it was that 50-50. Should we double down on the four things that are extremely important to us, or should we look at shoring up entrepreneurial? And what we start to realize is it's a combination of a lot of things. It's, there are perhaps other pillars on which you could found your brand, and it can actually drive more value for you. And eventually what we did was we actually connected that to dollar values, right? If you were to drive easy to integrate, you can actually incrementally grow your revenue by $4.4 million, right? And this is now starting to tie, brand equity and how you reach, your consumers to financial outcomes. What's cool about the behavioral side of the analysis and the financial outcomes is that it includes, this concept of entrenchment. I have an iPhone, okay? I am far from an Apple fanboy. I respect and I actually like Android and Samsung as well. And it doesn't matter how great I feel about it, I'm still going to buy an iPhone, right? If we just went purely on perceptions and not actually look at entrenchment and behavior, you will never be able to carve out a true dollar value of growth for the brand that you're working with. And this could be your own brand. At the end of the day, we were able to actually tell them that they need to completely refocus their brand into 4 pillars: forward thinking, transform your business, good service, and easy to integrate. We call this TGIF: transform, integration, good service, and forward thinking. So it's this quick mantra that they can shout within the organization, so they understand, where they should be spending their time and their energy. It was this rallying cry. But what we were able to do was, kind of parse it out, using that notion that brand is a team sport. Marketing is not able to actually drive all of this growth, right? There are certain attributes that marketing can drive, but customer service was equally important, and they had to drive that, and marketing could play a supporting role to customer service. So this is where brand is an enterprise activity really comes to life, to understand that you cannot run your organization in a very siloed way. You can't have your fiefdoms and expect that you're going to have amazing financial outcomes. It will crumble. You're going to have a lot of inefficiencies built in there. But what was interesting was the playbook that came from it. And it was built on this notion of, if you had $1 to spend, where would you invest that dollar within the organization? And with this new CMO coming in, they wanted to have splashy commercials. They wanted to have amazing campaigns, spend all this money. But it had to be tempered with the idea of, will it actually grow the business? And this is where the playbook comes in. We looked at a lot of their CRM data and their usage data, and we realized that prospects took 15 months to convert. And prospects that had 1 or 2 products, so this is, a category where you can actually buy more than 1 product from more than 1 vendor. So imagine that you are you're a photographer, right? If you had only, 1 camera, you're an amateur photographer, you're not going to have a lot of products within that sector. But the more sophisticated you get as a photographer, you're going to have more and more products. And if we're doing this for Canon, let's just say it's Canon, it's not always going to be Canon products. You might have a Sigma lens or a Tamron something or other, a Manfrotto tripod, or whatever that may be. So what we started to realize was, hey, a prospect that had 1 or 2 products had a certain upside to it. In this case, around $20 million. If you had more than 3 products, you had another upside. It was about $26 million. But what was amazing is what actually triggered them to participate with the brand, and the profiles were very different. If you had 1 or 2 products, you were really looking at press coverage, online ads, and your network. That recommendation was extremely important. If you had 3 or more products, you already kind of knew what is it that you needed from that sector, so you would go directly to the salesperson. Right? This is what I'm looking for. I know exactly what it is. Do you have it? When can you get it from me? That type of thing. And so both were very much about industry-leading talent and being relationship focused. And what actually triggered an action for those with 1 or 2 products was, did you attend an event? And in the tech space, we know that these events are so important to drive future business. But if you had 3 or more products, because you already knew what you were looking for, the website was incredibly important, right? You can go directly there, source, and figure out, hey, they have it, they don't have it, are my needs going to be solved? But what was interesting was when we shifted our gaze from the prospect to clients itself, right? So this is like, if you're in the NGO space, it can be, people who've never donated to people who've donated before. Right? Whatever that may be. If you're in the luxury space, it's people who have never purchased a luxury product, or have just kind of dabbled within it versus people who are already your customer and have either purchased a lot or even just a few pieces with you. And what we realized was obviously clients took a lot shorter amount of time to convert. If you had one or two products, the growth was unbelievable because they could really grow with your brand, right? You could cross-sell within your organization. What was important to them or what triggered those things were out of home. So out of home are things like the billboards, right? If you had 3 or more products, you wanted to walk out and say, you see that billboard over there? You know, that is what I'm invested in, right? They service my company. We do amazing work and we're facilitated by them. And it's unbelievable. We actually see this in action when we look at sometimes a billboard. I remember seeing this ad and it was a Burberry ad and it had Burberry all over it. In the bottom right, it said SAP, powered by SAP. And it wasn't a Burberry ad, it was actually an SAP ad, right? But understanding that affiliation is so important and creating those connections to brand equity is incredibly important. People who had 1 or 2 products, those brochures were their way of navigating the system. What was important to the clients who had 3 or more products was all about business transformation. And what's interesting about this is that our client sold a tech product that was incredibly expensive, which meant that if you went to the board to get authorization to spend, $100 million or whatever that number is, you better have business transformation. You better have good service. And if you had 1 or 2 products, you knew that you could actually grow with the brand. They had enough range of services and products that you don't have to kind of patch it up with somebody else. And finally, that consultation with the referral or that trusted network was incredibly important. So what was amazing was we could actually go to the CMO and say, this is how you're going to invest. This is the data that actually underpins it from a business case perspective. What's interesting is that most people, whether they're doing something from the brand perspective or from a business operations perspective, do so from a very piecemeal approach, right? They might do a market sizing exercise or ROI, customer experience, usage, whatever that may be. But no one actually kind of rolls it all together into a single framework to be able to analyze this. Brand management is all about data analytics and activation. And you can replace the left-hand side of this with anything. This could be modern marketing is all about data analytics and activation. Good management, right? It's unbelievable the amount of data that we can actually source, right? This example is all about the perceptual side of data because it's easy to shore up and get data from usage itself, right? Well, how long was someone online? What does that actually look like? Or how many times do they call into the call center? We can grab all that call center data and load it into this. But that soft stuff, the perceptual side, is what is incredibly difficult. But if you can do it and source it, feel some research, even informally, you're able to then, have an amazing outcome that's quantitative. You don't want opinion and have qualitative data in here because the outcome of it is going to be, 50-50. And we truly believe that integrated measurement is the future. There's no reason why we can't blend all of these silos together and have shared and reciprocal KPIs within an organization. I know it's, for a lot of people, this is definitely a pipe dream, right? In this utopian future that I live in, that, we're all going to share data. But what's amazing is that that's where we're moving to, right? A lot of the data that we have today isn't on my laptop, it's in the cloud. And we can start to, grab it. Someone in marketing can start to grab the sales and the demand gen data, and start to link it to the ops itself and the financial outcomes. So integrated measurement is definitely the future. We're extremely, extremely excited by it. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time, for your attention. Uh, I am open to questions. I know we sped through this. There was a lot to kind of unpack, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed how you brought the case study, since you mentioned that the work is with intangibles, so it's nice to see like the actual results and the whole process of work that you have. So
Yeah, and
bringing the yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I forgot to actually mention, what the outcome with that client was. They actually did reposition based on this, and they were able to surpass $2 billion. I think 8 months earlier than they thought they would. So it's good news. It's great work.
It shows that it's an actual work. If
Yeah.
you do the whole calculation, the whole analytics thing, it gives the results you're expecting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if anyone wants to ask some questions, you can open your mic, or I can read from the chat box. There's one. Can you read the chat box, Mark, or do you want me to read it for you?
Can you read it out? Let me try to pull it up
absolutely.
here.
So we have a question for Didi Bahig. She thanked you for the presentation. She was curious about what the client decided to do. She said it was a very interesting case. So yeah, you just mentioned about the final result was.
I mean, the shortcut is that the final result was great, but it took a lot of buy-in and hand-holding, because a lot of these organizations, I mean, they're staffed with people like us, and we have egos, we have isms, we have our self-interests and whatnot. And what ends up happening is that you don't always get 100% alignment, right? And so, in theory, this works great because you could just like pummel it through, and everyone's just gonna accept it and execute it. But that's not how it always happens, right? There's a great quote that says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," right? And if you don't have the culture in place, I don't care what strategy you have; it could be the best thing out there. It's just going to go fall flat. And we were very fortunate that we had, number one, executive buy-in. This was done at the C-suite level and the board level. And so you were able to kind of really direct it top down, but not in a forceful approach, right? But from an enrollment approach, get everyone on board. And that's where the success was. We don't always have the same success because of politics, right? And you're often not aware of the politics until you're knee deep in it already. And that's the problem with data. So, it's a good thing and a bad thing, because it'll either bring to light something that you just never wanted to bring to light, right? And it's going to say something about your performance or your management style, or it's going to reinforce it and you'll feel fabulous, but you'll never know unless you do it. But I'm happy for the positive outcome with this client. But that's not always the case.
Absolutely. Any other question? I think I have another message here. So we have. No, I have another question here. So
yeah.
For Girish Sharma, so pricing is always considered as one of the most important parameter for a customer. What was that also taken as a parameter for comparison?
No. See, there are things which are functional, experiential, and emotional. Price is functional, right? Everyone says they want the best price, and they'll always go with the cheapest, but that's not true, right? I mean, I had a client in the retail gas space, and what was interesting was everyone said price was the most important thing for why they pumped at a certain gas station. And if that were true, then you would pump at the most dodgiest gas stations, right? The ones that are not well lit, the ones that didn't have the tap to pay and things like that. What drove consumption on that was, the convenience factors and the safety factors and things like that. We tend to think that price is important, price is not. We're willing to pay anything if we feel that there's value in it. Working for Lululemon, I got to see that firsthand. You know, $129 for a hoodie. You can go, you can, like, the only other person that can charge that was our direct competition, which was Aritzia, right? You could go to Gap and spend $29 for that hoodie, right? And so while there are a lot of people who'll go to Gap and pay that, there were tons of people who will go to Lululemon to pay that $129 for that same hoodie. If we feel that price is an important part, we'll load it in. But most functional things are things that you just have to deliver on, and it can be reasoned using something experiential or emotional to justify that price, right? And then you'll just pay it. And most people do, right? That there's a reason why luxury brands are alive and kicking to this day. You know, there's a reason why you'll go spend $1.5 million on a McLaren F1 or a Aston Martin or something like that, right? It's a car with four wheels, right? At the end of the day, maybe. So it's the same thing as a doctor saying the thing that's the most important is health outcomes. It better be, right? But you're not going to position based on that. And price is just one of those things that if you position on price, it's going to be a race to the bottom. Sunlight positioned on price, they're sold at the dollar store today. Tide with P&G did not, right? They positioned on things which are far more emotional, and they're far more successful as a brand. We see that with Apple as well, right? If price really mattered, go buy an Android. But Apple commands more handsets sold in the industry and more of the profit. I mean, the graph is, I don't have it on me today, but I mean, the graph is hilarious to see the gap between the two. I hope I answered your question. Let me know if I didn't.
Perfect. We have two more questions here. Do you mind
Yeah, go
answering
ahead.
them? Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
no
want to take
problem.
all your time in this holiday, but
No, it's
so
okay.
I have a question from Paulo. He said that you mentioned something about fear of people sharing their data. But what about reliable and valid governmental data when we are talking about external factors? Uh, can we trust all the data we have, and how to deal with that?
Yeah, great question. No, I mean, you can't trust it. You can't trust it. Your job in the data space is to validate the veracity of that data. And what you can do is you need to understand and qualify the source of the data, and then you have to go and triangulate it. Meaning, you know, can you verify that the data that you received is, you know, there's an echo of it somewhere else, or you can derive that data from, you know, these other two sources of data, 3 sources, 10 sources, whatever that may be, to have some sort of overlap with that one data source. Governmental data is interesting because depending on the government, the data is clean, right, and it's transparent. There are some governments that fudge the data, and they do so not because it's intentional, but because they don't have the error checking, and there's transcription errors and things like that, and it just happens to be that way. You know, I always question data, especially with COVID. Sometimes I look at some of these country data sets, and I'm like, how is it that you only have 8 deaths in that country? Is that possible? Right? We have, I mean, in no other place is that possible, right? Everywhere has had far more than 8 deaths. And then so you have to figure out, you know, was that a lack of testing, right? So now I got to go and diagnose, why is this data inaccurate, right? Is it a matter of testing? Is it because there's political, you know, there's a political agenda? Maybe they're so reliant on tourism that they can't show 8,000 deaths. I don't know. But it's only through the triangulation of data and understanding, well, you know, this one island nation is very similar to that island nation. They got the same amount of flights coming in, same population density, that type of thing. And then to figure out, hey, maybe it's legitimate. That second island nation also only has 12 deaths. Maybe 8 is completely reasonable. But you can't just trust it. You have to check it. You have to stress test it.
Got it. Perfect. So let's have a last question here. It comes from Hans Katu. It's a great question because I believe most of us here are students. He asks any tips for students who are considering business consultant as a career.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just about like being a business consultant, but it's about equipping yourself with the tools for what not even tomorrow looks like, what 10 years from now looks like. And so today, what we see is that most people who are very successful are actually kind of they can be applied, cross-functionally, right? A marketer that has, that knows how to code in Python or in R, right? Before they were very separate, right? It was you were a programmer and you knew Python or R, and then you were a marketer. But today, we're seeing all these divides kind of come down. So my number one tip is you need to be everything, quite frankly, and then you can specialize from there. But you have to have a great, a foundation for numbers, and be it financial or analytics. You have to have the ability to communicate very succinctly, and that's an art. I mean, it's something that we all struggle with on a daily basis. And taking things like philosophy in school to be able to think through something and communicate it in a very effective way is incredibly important. And the last tip is you just got to get out there and do stuff, right? Most of us think that as students, there's nothing that we can affect in this world, and we're just students, and no one will take us seriously. But that's not true, right? We've seen a lot of students create some amazing things and get noticed and get amazing jobs, or even just really go on their own and create immense amounts of value for society and for themselves as well. And so being able to get out there and do something and being fearless, it's something that's like a skill that has to be reinforced. But that would be my next tip, which is just get out there, put yourself out there. We have platforms that help us do that. We have LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever, Facebook, if that's your thing. But the majority of us, and I'm one of them, I'm like the world's biggest introvert. I'm happy to be under my shell somewhere, but I understand that I got to actually put myself out there. And if I don't, then I'm not able to create value and find opportunities.
Right, great. Appreciate the tips, Mark. So I guess that concludes our event for tonight. And also our next event, we don't have the event right for it yet, but it's going to be on March 1st with Mr. Siwin Wang. He's the program lead for health financial analytics for the Ontario Hospital Association. So anyone who is interested in the relation between analytics and health and hospitals, it's going to be a really great session for all of you. Like I mentioned, you can keep in touch with us with our LinkedIn groups. And I believe that Eventbrite also sends an email whenever we have a new event. So I really hope to see everyone there as well. And Mark, once again, thank you so much for being here this night. We really appreciate the presentation and all the insights and advice that you gave us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.